An official with the U.S. State Department stopped in New Orleans in hopes of recruiting more people of color into foreign service.
Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman spoke to students at Dillard University. She says the Biden administration wants to build a more diverse State Department and is partnering with historically black colleges and universities. Fox 8 also asked her about what the State Department is doing to secure the release of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich from Russia.
Secretary Blinken has just designated Evan as wrongfully detained. That means we will bring a particular set of resources to bear to try to get him home as soon as possible. But I think that the Russians think that they've got someone of great value. There are other Americans who are being wrongfully detained, Paul Whelan, in Russia as well, and we will continue to bring all Americans home.
And in terms of State Department employment, Sherman said they have a variety of jobs from working in the passport office to foreign service officers who work as diplomats, as well as opportunities for scientists related to global health.